Well, hello and welcome to 5 Years Out, Reflections, Ideas, and Future Movement Theater Division. Theater, as you know, as a performing art, is dynamic. It is provocative, collaborative, a creative act, a means of speaking truth and evoking emotion, of telling us who we are and showing us who we can become. Theater, as our mission statement notes, is an aesthetic form of communication. And as the National Communication Association anticipates its 100th anniversary, we come together as NCA's Theater Division to consider our roles within this organization and within the larger communities of which we are a part, with particular attention to the roles we want to be playing 5 years from now. Today we will begin with reflections on the division's formation, its initial goals, and those identified by the membership within the last 10 years. We will consider these goals and the challenges we face in an increasingly challenging environment. Leading this charge are two of our most distinguished and long-standing members, Patty Gillespie and Gerald Lee Ratliff. I thought you'd like that. I, Monica Anderson, will continue our review of the past with observations on the last 10 years of the division's work. And Roberta Crisson will offer some insight on the current climate in which we seek to continue our work. A new addition to our panel is Megan Moe, who will recap the results of her study of NCA's oldest publication and the extent to which that publication has represented theater-related research since that journal's inception. After our initial reflections, we will hear from respondents Julie Mullenkamp, Michael O'Hara, and James Brandon, who will offer their own reflections and questions to provoke discussion in which we all might participate as we consider the role of the theater division 5 years out. So, Patty and Gerald Lee.
My remarks are going to focus principally on the rather anomalous role of the theater division, thank you, in SCA. But I want to begin with the history. As you may know by now, the NCA was founded under a different name in 1914. And when it was first founded, everything having to do with speaking and speech and listening were in that one organization. So that speech science, hearing, speech correction, theater, oral into the whole, everything was there. That was true until the 1930s. And in the 30s, the association began to calve off some units that were not as central to public speaking. And the first one to leave was speech correction audiology. And one of the first was in theater, and they calved off in 1937. The year before that, however, there was a woman, Maud May Babcock, who was a theater person, who was president of the National Association. So theater, although leaving, was still an integral part of NCA. That was more or less true until, or actually through the 1950s, because although theater separated from NCA, they still held joint conventions. So they each had their own set of officers and their own organizational principles and so on, but they met together and they shared convention programming and convention space. As late as 1958, we had another theater person who was nominated for second vice president, and that was Hubert Hefner, a major theater scholar. He was not elected, but still the two associations were very closely linked. That linkage began to fray more after the 50s, and it had to do with a number of things. Some of it had to do with theater itself changing. After the war, theater became more professionalized, less of a liberal art, and we also had the number of departments that went out on their own as opposed to being joint departments increased through the 60s. But there remained within NCA, even though there was a separate organization now, a theater division. My first attendance at the theater division was in 1970. That was 56 years after it had gotten started, NCA. And it was pathetic. The first time I came, I think there were 3 people at the business meeting, maybe 4. And either that meeting or the one right after that, I was made the president of the theater division simply because I'd showed up. And there wasn't anybody else, really. And it was quite casual. When I stepped down as chair, I simply tapped Gladys Crane and said, Gladys, would you chair the division for a while? The point is, we were here and we had programs, but it was a very weak and a very ingrown division. That, I think, changed in the 1980s. And what happened then was that Bowling Green State University and the University of Maryland began to feed their doctoral students into the theater division. And there were a number of reasons for that. Alan White had long been a member of the division in theater, as had I. And Alan White was at BGSU. Both schools still had joint departments. And in the case of Maryland, it even had a joint PhD program, a program offered with radio, television, film, speech, and journalism. So there was every reason in the world for our doctoral students to find a home in this organization. Their friends were coming, and so on. And a number of people continued to come because they were in joint departments. Others came because this association housed a major administrators association, which met. And the point is that a lot of people that were in theater at the time were chairing departments that housed speech as well as theater. So all of those theater people were coming, and some of the speech people that had theater within their divisions were coming so they could meet theater people. So I think that was sort of the high point, and pardon me, it was made even better by the fact that people in the theater division were always nice. And so you didn't feel bad about bringing your first-year graduate students and having them deliver their first ever paper, which might not be really good, but which would not be savaged as it would have been had you given it at what amounts to ATHE now. And because the division was small, you could almost always guarantee them a place on the program. And that was another reason for bringing them. So beginning in the 80s and accelerating in the 90s, we got a continuing influx of graduate students, doctoral students. They would come their first year and give their first paper on the debut panel, and then they'd come the second year and give their second paper on the contributed papers, and then the next year they'd put together. So we had them for 3 or 4 years, and several of them have stayed with us from then on. As I look around me today, however, I think what we need to ask ourselves is how can we keep this division healthy and how can we grow it? And I think we're not going to grow it through joint programming with ATHE. Let me be clear, I think we should continue to do that. Jill Kaufman did it for a number of years. I think it's terribly important, and I think we ought to do it, but we've been doing it since the 70s, and we don't get very many members that way. I think the same thing can be said about performance studies. I think we should continue to work closely with them, and they with us, as we have since I've been in. But again, I don't think we're going to get any big influx of people from them because we never have. I think, too, that we're not going to get many, and Gerald has been very active in that connection, I think, over the years. But again, it's not a connection that's brought us a whole lot of people. Sharon Ahman has been very helpful in bringing undergraduate students. And I hope we continue to do that because they bring a kind of vitality to the programs and they have new ideas. But again, I don't think you're going to get many new members from them because as soon as they get out of her class, they stop coming. And so they're not. What has worked, and the only thing that has worked to really build the numbers has been outreach to doctoral students. At least that's my impression. I don't think you're going to get them anymore from Maryland because that program is moving in a new direction. I hope we can continue to get them from Bowling Green, though I don't think it's as vigorously pursued at Bowling Green now as it used to be. So those of you who have connections there might want to work on that. Maybe with Ron Shields, you might be able to push him to get more people in. I don't think he's followed that as well as Alan Kepke did. There are a couple of other programs in the country, though, that I think are likely. One is Texas Tech, because they have a very large program, not unlike Bowling Green's, and it is for most part a generalist's program, which is what I think fits well in this division. And they also have a track in public relations. And of course, public relations is one of the major units within NCA. And I think there's a logical connection there. But I think what it means is there's actually going to have to be contact made with that or other programs to see if we can't begin to bring in doctoral students to take the place of leadership. Once they get here, then, I think we have to ask ourselves what we can offer or what we have been offering that aren't offered by ATHE or ASTR. I think ATHE is primarily for the professional-oriented performance and production people. ASTR is primarily for the scholars. And I don't think we're going to do either of those things as successfully as they do them. It seems to me, as I look back on my 30 years or so in this division, that what we've always succeeded in is talking about the teaching of theater and thinking about the teaching of theater. I think about Sarah Nally's programs that she's run every year now for I don't know how many, on the teaching of acting, in which there's an exchange of activities, and we get to try those activities out and discuss them. And we've had from time to time syllabus exchanges on introduction to theater courses and so on. One of the first programs that I was ever involved in was a review of introduction to theater courses around the country, and it had a full house. So I think there is a place here for people who are really interested in the teaching of theater in colleges and universities and perhaps even in high schools. But I will end by saying, I think if we don't do something pretty soon, we're going to be in the same situation that we were in when I first joined. Because if you look around this room and look at the approximate ages of the people here, if we don't do something pretty soon, I think the theater division of SCA is going to sort of march off the cliff together, and then it has to be built up from scratch again, and that's very difficult to do.
Patty forgot to say, of course, that she was a theater person elected a president of NCA, so we should remind everyone of that. Knowing that Patty was going to talk a great deal about the history, I thought I'd share just some memories I have of the division. I came in 1972, so I must be one of those dinosaurs that Patty's talking about. One of the interesting things I think, though, when I came was that my interest was very broad. It not only included the theater, but it also included performance studies, public speaking, and a lot of analysis that dealt with rhetorical criticism. And so the welcoming of the theater division was very warm. It had very little to do with Bowling Green. We were all dragged here, whether we wanted to come or not. So that was part of getting the degree, I think. It was a requirement. What I found most interesting, though, was the programming. There were many opportunities for those who were young in their career to assume a leadership role, not only in the division, but in the programming. And as I recall, in those early years, the programming really was interdisciplinary, and I felt much more comfortable sharing programs with colleagues in other divisions than exclusively the theater. What I do recall is that the folks at that time were more into the workshop approach, which I found much more exciting. The panel discussions and the paper sessions were, as Patty said, sometimes held captive by advisors who brought their students. But the individual techniques and styles of performance that were often in workshop settings were much more valuable to me in my later work, particularly in Reader's Theater. I think that the early years of my association with the association focused more on networking And it wasn't necessarily those I met at the conference that were valuable in the research that I was doing in English literature, for example. It was the connections they had with others at their institutions. And I think over the years, the networking aspect has not been as vigorous as it was in the mid-'70s when I was more active. I think that the discipline has changed dramatically in a national sense. The theater division has an opportunity to serve as a very valuable resource. I'm not sure what steps have been taken to do that. With so many now nationally accredited associations, within NCA, for example, communication has many accreditation arm. And so speech communication programs are reviewed by peers. The theater doesn't have that. And I think that would give some credibility to programs that are aspiring, for example, to perhaps pursue NAST accreditation, to have colleagues from the profession commenting on their programs before they propose them to NAST. Another interesting aspect that I remember is that we were always in contact, that the communication, even before email, was newsletters and those kinds of contact that were much more personal and spelled out in more detail expectations the division had. Some of those early experiences also included those friendships, of course, that are always very valuable, but they help to make connections with research and sharing research ideas, the publication of books and including works from those who have talents and skills that the editor may not have. I'm thinking particularly my next-door neighbor who contributed a wonderful piece to a book I did. So I would say that even though there are more than 100 plus, 179, I think, members of the association, I'm not quite sure that that is the underlying cause of a lack of attendance. I'm wondering if it's not outreach initiatives and that kind of programming, those kinds of connections that bring those 179 to the conference, in particular to these sessions. Some of them I know are in other sessions. Why they're not coming to the theater offerings is a question for which I don't have an answer. So I'm very positive that the division will remain. It may not be as vigorous and as energetic. It's more the outreach initiatives and strategies that will attract those who may or may not be solely related to theater. In my job, recruitment across a university system includes community colleges, for example. And the theater programs, at least in the state of New York, are very robust. Outreach initiatives at that level, I think, might be of some value, too, across the states of the members who are active in the association. And I think limiting ourselves only to the NCA is never healthy. Most of you, I know, are active in your associations. Bless you. Inviting programs that feature those from your own NCA division might also give a more public view to what's going on in the profession, at least NCA too. So I think of all of those sort of management approaches to recruiting and retaining colleagues, just as we would at our institutions for students, knowing that there are various levels. Some will enter with problems that need to be resolved in remedial work, and others are far more advanced. And those kinds of connections, I think, would give some fresh breath to the division. So I'm always very optimistic.
I have been a member of the NCA Theater Division for 19 years, and from 1996 to 1999, I was an officer of the division. That was a time when, in anticipation of the start of the new millennium, the Theater Division made a concerted effort to reevaluate its purpose and set goals for the era ahead. We identified 3 areas of examination in preparation for the 21st century: mission, membership, and mentoring. I would like to share with you an account of that process and challenge those present to consider to what extent we have met and continue to meet the goals we established nearly 10 years ago, and to what extent we still consider these goals to be important to us. Essential to our process of self-examination was the establishment of a convention panel entitled Where Do We Go From Here? A critical look at mentoring, membership, and mission of the NCA Theater Division. This panel was first presented at the 1997 National Convention and was repeated in 1998 and 99. Several members of the division were invited to participate as panelists in the roundtable discussion, and all members of the division were encouraged through the division newsletter to attend. One of the most concrete and foundational accomplishments of these panels was the creation and dissemination of a mission statement. After several revisions, the members in attendance at the second business meeting of the 1998 New York Convention endorsed the following statement, and it was shared with the entire division membership via the division's newsletter. The Theater Division of the National Communication Association is an open community of theater educators, scholars, artists, critics, and students who promote and participate in the active exchange of ideas with primary emphasis on theater as an aesthetic form of communication. We recognize and celebrate the importance of teaching, scholarship, artistic practice, advocacy, and mentoring as mutually supportive activities in promoting the uniqueness of theater as a communicative art. The Theater Division also strives to explore and establish the dynamic connections between theater and related disciplines, and within the varied and collaborative art of theater, its history, theory, and practice. In addition to the adoption of this mission statement, the membership approved the formation of an archive committee charged with researching and publishing the history of the Theater Division. We agreed that understanding where the division had been would aid its members in determining where to go next. Addressing concerns of membership, audience surveys were introduced at the 1997 convention and were used at most subsequent conferences after each theater division-sponsored panel. The object of these surveys was to measure how well the division was satisfying the expectations of its members who attend the convention, and to determine how it might also appeal to NCA members outside of the theater division. Other efforts to address membership included steps to, 1, increase diversity of division membership by participating more fully in the activities of other NCA divisions and caucuses and developing other outreach strategies, and 2, to encourage both undergraduate and graduate student attendance at the convention, looking specifically at ways to reduce the financial burden of conference attendance. A Distinguished Service Award Committee was formed as a way of honoring members who have been of particular service to the division. Interested in connecting with other organizations whose members share similar concerns for the development of its discipline, NCA's Theater Division gained affiliation status with the Association for Theater and Higher Education. One result of this alliance, as Patty noted, was the awarding of 2 program slots for the NCA Theater Division at ATHA's annual national convention. Addressing mentoring, since 1997, program planners have often included in the division's convention offerings panels and social events that are geared toward the creation and development of mentorship. At one point in time, members of the division were exploring the development of a formal mentorship program for the theater division that would include mentorship in teaching, scholarship, and artistry, career mapping, tenure review preparation, and social gatherings for connection building. A system was also developed for the writing of letters on behalf of division members to their department chairs in support of their participation in NCA. At the 2000 convention in Seattle, the officers of the theater division anticipated continued progress in the areas of mission, membership, and mentoring. Extending itself beyond its own membership, the theater division cooperated with other divisions and caucuses within NCA for the sponsorship of several programs. These groups included the Asian Pacific American Caucus, Critical and Cultural Division, Environmental Communication Division, Feminist and Women's Studies Division, and Performance Studies Division. The Theater Division also offered a program entitled Mentoring, a continuing discussion of the issues of mentoring theater educational professionals in the 21st century. Also in 2000, Spectre published an article that I wrote describing these accomplishments and goals of the NCA Theater Division. That article concluded with this statement: "It is the hope of the Theater Division membership that the 2000 convention will mark a bold entrance into the new millennium, fueled by a renewed sense of purpose and an ever-strong commitment to serving the teachers, scholars, artists, and students that it represents. As we anticipate the 100th anniversary of NCA, we remember and celebrate our division's history, and we do so in an effort to positively affect our future, to remember why we are here, how we got here, and where we want to be in at least the next 5 years, to renew our sense of purpose and our commitment to those we represent. As we look at today's challenges to the theater artists, scholars, and educators, we might consider questions like, what can NCA offer theater artists, scholars, and educators that they cannot find in a professional organization dedicated solely to theater? How might the NCA Theater Division grow our membership while also enhancing our service to current members? And what should we, a group dedicated to promoting the uniqueness of theater as a communicative art, what should we be doing to ensure the growth, development, and survival of our discipline? It is this final question that Roberta Christen takes up in our exploration of 5 years out. Roberta?
Thanks. I think the fundamental question of what must we do is to, as Gerald Lee expressed, take a positive outlook on what the possibilities are. My method, I guess you'd say, of problem solving has always been to look at how can we work with as well as around the challenges that we are presented in order to reach our goal, which is our mission, a successful reaching of our mission statement and completion of our mission statement. I believe that we have done a great deal toward in the early 2000s of moving toward that, but what we have to do now is look at moving with, as Gerald Lee said, outreach. I think we must go toward the collaboration with not only other division, but with other organizations. I think we have to do a better public relations job of getting into our institutions and defining what this division can do for the undergraduate programs as well as the graduate programs. I'm going to use an example of Pennsylvania, and I shared this with some of our colleagues last night. Pennsylvania this year had the dubious honor of being the only state in the Union without a budget after 100 days past the end of the fiscal year. While that doesn't directly affect the theater division of NCA, it certainly affected the programs, the morale of the faculty in the programs, and their ability to keep a positive outlook on attending conventions, not the least of which was the unavailability of travel funds to present. Now, we can't solve the political problems of Pennsylvania, but what we can do is to, through our newsletter, through our outreach, continue to encourage our colleagues to continue to submit materials that, as we talked about this afternoon, involve as many people on panels as possible to bring those new scholars in. Many organizations, many campuses have, for example, temporary faculty travel funds. Many have new scholars travel funds that are set up within colleges. Every new faculty hire, if they're on a tenure track, must continue to present must continue to contribute, must add those presentations to their CVs. If we can reach out to those new faculty, if we can go into, on our own campuses, canvas we're one of 14 regional universities. It's not unheard of for me to send out an email to my theater colleagues in other universities. How many new faculty do you have? Can you give me their names? Can I encourage them? Can I encourage them to join a panel? Because many of them are just now learning the game of the campus at hand and haven't had time to think about that. So reaching out in those ways to new faculty can encourage them to come on board. Reaching out to those in other divisions who might have a link. The Women's Caucus is a good example. The Religious Communication is another fine example. Somebody mentioned that rhetoric is now using the word performance, and you're saying, and it's theater. I had an interesting conversation on my way to the Palmer House today with a young woman who's looking for graduate programs in rhetoric, and I was talking about the rhetoric of theater. And I said, you can go back to the Living Theater of Judith Medina, and of course that's ancient history for this child, but how theater has always had a rhetorical presence and been instrumental as a voice of change, of cultural change, of social change, of political change. And so looking to include, as a division of inclusion of all of those kinds of outreach programs, I think can stimulate at least some new beginnings and some new avenues of thought into how we can grow our division. I would agree with Patty that our division has a strong focus on the teaching of theater, and I don't believe the two are incompatible. To teach about how you infuse improvisational theater into the curriculum. How do you infuse teaching about the rhetoric of social movements into the theater as a part of it, of a theater program? Those are all different ways of approaching, which has kind of been my modus operandi. And I get headaches butting up against stone walls. So I try to be creative about how can we work with those who might have mutual interests and still retain our identity as a theater division, and instead of trying to join with, let's say, the Religious Communication division in doing something, bring them into our fold and present from the theater point of view and from the theatrical perspective. I also think that as we look toward the future, the challenges for all of you who are in theater administration at your various institutions, we know that much of our job often has very little to do with theater in general, but may have to do with administration in particular. Even though we are not administrators per se, we are faculty who are charged with the administrative duties. I think going in the direction of, okay, how does theater operate within the academic institution, and how can we become a bigger presence in the academic institution? And I say that because in many institutions, it gets harder and harder and harder to justify a small maybe it's a beautifully valuable theater program within an institution that is being bombarded from the outside by STEM people. Now, for those of you who do not know what STEM means, it's science, technology, engineering, and math. And when you get people who are saying, who want to quantify the ability of the opportunities for students to have jobs, and you have a theater program that can't do that, then you have forces coming in from the outside that make it a lot more difficult for a theater person who is so busy trying to justify the program's existence to be able to do the scholarly work on a regular basis. I think those are things that can be addressed within the division because they're a very real thing. I'll give you a good example in Pennsylvania. Because the 14 regional universities of which Kutztown is a part are owned by the state system of higher education, then the performance objectives come from the chancellor's office. Academic programs who are graduating fewer than 20 majors in a 5-year span are being looked at very carefully to see whether or not they will be retained, no matter how brilliant a program it is, how rich it is, no matter that ACTF has reviewed their productions and has given them certificates of merit in every area. If that program is not graduating a quantifiable number of people, it may be dropped from the state system. That is absolutely frightening. And so I think that's why I think that those are all areas that we as a division have to address, because those are the realities of many programs. And no, they're not aesthetically exciting, and know that it's a lot more fun to do workshops, as Gerald Lee said. But I do think those are other areas that are of great concern to us that can strengthen this division because we're addressing some hard problems, and that's the pragmatist in me. As much fun as we had at the performance panel this afternoon, and the joy that we got from experiencing that wonderful artistic expression. At the same time, I think we must look at the total picture of how can we appeal to some of these folks that are coming down the line through the ability to. And I would agree that because we're small, our new colleagues, if we can attract them here and say, this is a place where you can probably be on the program in one way, shape, or form that will build your CV, that will give you your professional development, and strengthen your packet for tenure. So all of those things I think we can consider.
We'll now turn the program over to Megan Moe, and Megan's just going to give us a recap of something she presented earlier at the conference, and it might provoke some additional thoughts regarding our relationship to the larger organization, particularly in terms of the publication of our scholarship. So, Megan?
Good evening. When the National Association of Academic Teachers of Public Speaking, that's what we were back in 1914, NAATPS, the organization was a lot more than just speech teachers, and drama had a particularly rich connection, as you've really heard already, with our organization. And one of my interests was to go back and look at the journal and look at every single journal since the first one that was printed in 1914, at that point called the Quarterly Journal of Public Speaking, and trace how theater was recognized and how it was established in the journal. And what I found is that in the beginning there was this wonderful marriage between drama, theater, and the speech organization. And so as I looked at all of this, and I know I got a little bit crazy by looking at absolutely every single article and reading every one that I could get my hands on. There are a couple that are lost forever. But I read as much as I could, and I found a few different themes throughout, so I thought I'd just give you a quick overview of what I found. Playlists were one of the fun things that appeared in a lot of the earliest articles. Alec Drummond was a prolific writer. He wrote almost every year. There's an article by him in the journal for many, many years. And one of the things that one of the authors said, dramatic work in colleges seems, from the necessity of the case, bound to relate itself more definitively and officially to departments of public speaking. And so there's this argument that theater and public speaking needed to be together, and that they were linked. Another important element was theaters and the teaching of it in school. Something that we're also hearing tonight needs to be the thought of theater and education, and how we need to link drama to academia and not just to performance. And one of the fun things with this is actually in 1921, one of the authors suggests that there be a dramatic production mounted at the convention every year. It never says if they actually did it, but it would be kind of fun to have seen that. And that's something we could do, yes? Next year, mount a production. There are also practical issues, tips on lighting, costume, makeup, and different instructions for actors as well as teachers. A number of informative articles that talked about Greek theater, colonial theater, and they became scarcer after the 50s and 60s. And then speech and theater were also focused on, and authors were making that connection between drama and speech training and trying to encourage speech teachers to use drama to bring out better speaking techniques. Pantomime was just a very odd journey for about 5 years. There were a number of articles about pantomime. Shakespeare has been a consistent theme in the journal. A lot of rhetorical analyses, but also just some informative and tips for mounting Shakespearean productions. Rhetoric is the most current theme that has developed within the Quarterly Journal of Speech. And so what I found in the past 25 years is really there's only been rhetorical articles, but it has become less and less. And let me get to my conclusion here. The idea that, just to give you a couple dates, I think the last theater article I found was in 2004, and it was an article that talked about A Raisin in the Sun being turned into a screenplay. And so it wasn't even a pure theater article, and before that it was 1988 was the previous article that dealt with Brecht's Drums in the Night. Before that, 1975 Tennessee Williams play. So from 75 to 2009, 3 articles. And so it just shows how theater has been, I think, pushed aside from the National Communication Association. And the subject of theater, although it's appeared in many different forms over the past 95 years, from printing lists to informative articles, Quarterly Journal of Speech has printed a variety of ideas. But as the NAA TPS matured into SCA, their wide range of interest in theater matured into a presentation of theater as rhetoric. And then as SCA changed to NCA, theater has become less relevant to the scholars who write for and read the Quarterly Journal of Speech. Now, I'm actually a rhetorician by training, but I have always used theater as my primary text that I research. And my first debut paper in 1989 was here on Waiting for Lefty, audience identification and Waiting for Lefty. And then I presented a few other times using theater in the rhetorical analyses. And I love this division, and I'd love to see it continue and be healthy.
In our remaining 25 minutes or so, we're going to turn it over to our respondents and get their comments and questions and see what discussion we might get going. So, Julie, Michael, James?
And I'm going to be paper, rock, scissors. Fine. All right, I will be the pessimist. And I will be the defeatist. Because I hear everything that has been said at the panel, and I agree. I think there have been very many good faith efforts by the members of this division to reach out to the rest of the divisions. I remember programming New Orleans, and I think every single panel was co-sponsored with someone else. And what we have consistently found in our division is that has been a one-way street. That is, yes, we're willing to co-sponsor with you if it doesn't cost us anything. And you can only do that and be a sucker for so long before you have to ask yourself where the organization belongs and where this division belongs within the organization. I love this division. It is my home academically and artistically. The people that matter most to me are in this division. And as a national organization, I'm able to do some one-stop shopping. I'm able to do my interest in forensics and debates and film and performance studies, and that's wonderful. But we have to ask ourselves the question, how do we continue as theater people, primarily theater people, to support an organization where less than 2% of the membership are in the theater division, and where less than 2% of the articles published there are 7 major print journals in this organization now, plus a host of online and other journals. And I would argue that if we were to do the numbers as we just did in this wonderful presentation for QJS, that you wouldn't find any theater there, right? And so, I don't say, close down the division, but I don't see any trends that suggest that the division is going to return to what I think Patty maybe rightly describes as the glory days here. I think I came in right at the end of that, and we had this really rich, vibrant organization, and then people started to fall off. And so, as we look around at shrinking travel budgets, what I often find are people that come to NCA for a few years, and they go to ATHA, or they go to MLA, or they try to go to ASTR, which is hard because they tend to be the same weekend as NCA, and they find that their administrative money is going to be spent going to the other conference. If they can only go to one national conference, why would I, as a theater person, go to NCA? And so I think until we can answer that question, and I do think there are some answers to it, I don't know that there is a lot of hope for the future. And I say that in the hopes that the people in this room and the people who view this tape for posterity will pick up the torch, because God knows I've tried since I've been here to increase the membership in the organization, and it's not succeeded. And so I'm frustrated. And at the same time, I couldn't envision my academic life without this division. And so my pessimism, my defeatism comes out of a deep love of the theater division, and I'm hoping that somebody has a better vision than I, because my vision right now is very cloudy. And that is my response.
I, too, am a child of the glory days. But I was thinking, and I was listening for new ideas, and the one really new idea I heard that connected with a resonance I've learned since I myself have moved into administration is that institutional memories lie within an institution. And one of the things that has characterized the theater division for the last 10 years, maybe a little long, 10 years, is that the institutional memories that were housed at Maryland and Bowling Green dissipated quite quickly. Because no new graduate students came into the pipeline carrying with them the DNA of their teachers, so to speak. So we have a widely diverse group of people who teach at all different kinds of institutions and who perform all sorts of different roles, but we don't have a cohesive institutional memory that propagates itself. There's nothing new happening. And so I think actually identifying programs like perhaps Texas Tech is our best bet. I really, because then we get that again. We get the institution that has a value in it and feeds new life and new blood into the division. And it allows us to do all the other good ideas that we've talked about, co-sponsoring and talking up new issues. The only thing that I didn't hear that has been bugging me for a long time is that despite the AATE and the ATHE and ASTR and ISTR, there is no dedicated journal to theater pedagogy, unlike almost every other discipline. And I think that we could, if we combined two bold efforts to reach out to doctoral or graduate institutions where scholarship could, NCA could benefit them, and we could find a sponsor for a dedicated pedagogy journal in theater that would help new theater education programs that, because of wide-ranging state regulations across the country, have forced theater to become a content-certified area in education, whereas previously we could be speech theater ed, which is, my own program just changed 6 years ago to speech theater ed, to speech separate, theater separate. And so there is no home for these theater educators in colleges to advance their scholarly careers as theater educators. And so I think that's a real need. And so, although I share some of James's pessimism, I continue to come back because this has been a home for me, and I think it could be a home for others. And I would like to find a way to do that. And that's and since I'm the associate editor of Shaw, the Annual of Bernard Shaw Studies, and have convinced my institution to help support that, I would be willing to talk to some other institution to co-sponsor that if anybody could find one. Trying to be helpful.
And I come last because I'm all about the hope. I'm all about it. I came here as a graduate student from Bowling Green State University. My first time here, I debuted here as a graduate student. I took that $50 check and went out and bought a $3 meal and felt like I ate like a queen. And because Gladys Crane turned to me and said, "You have potential as a scholar, Julie Pratt. You will make it through a PhD program. You will teach someday." And I have come back every year. I agree with Patty. We got to get the students. And so that is why I am thrilled that John took on the challenge of going out there and recommitting ourselves to the student debut panel. And then I think we need to work on retention. In my time here since 1993, I've brought 12 students in on that debut panel. They no longer come to NCA because in the turnover of leadership, they were not remembered. So they came in as debut people, but when they went to the contributing panel, they weren't accepted because the next group was coming. Or when they presented that panel, they weren't nurtured in. One of my students was actually the secretary in this organization, and then for 2 years running, submitted panels that weren't accepted. He no longer comes here. So it's also continuity and identifying who is committed. And I don't know how the hell we're going to do that. But boy, that's one thing I think we need to think about in terms of retention. I also think that undergraduate and graduate programs are the way to go. I will continue to help in that regard. This year we identified a variety of graduate programs, targeted them, actually took the call, wrote a letter, and went after the professors in that institution to give that information to their students. I think we need to take a step further for that. My UCM was the one that paid for the paper, the photocopying, the postage to send that out. I think somehow we need to maybe make that part of the NCA Theater Division budget to move forward with that. And Texas Tech was one of the places we sent that letter to, specifically. I think we also perhaps need to educate administrators in what is the importance of what we do here, because they hold the purse strings for the professional development money that you're talking about. They also hold the purse strings for assessment, so I really appreciate what you're talking about in terms of that. And if there's one thing I do know, when we graduate our students, if you look at the skills test, which is what, the Fortune 500 13 skills, competencies, what industry's looking for. I mean, that's what's going to speak to an administrator is how you're going to get your graduates to have a job. Well, let's just look at them and see how they relate to theater. Teamwork, problem solving, oral communication, creative thinking, leadership, goal setting. We do organizational effectiveness. That is what we teach in theater. And so if we can somehow find a way to create a document that communicates that, make that available to administrators, stamp NCA Theater Division on it, I think that's going to excite people. Because we do focus on pedagogy. I can't say enough and echo enough what I think that both Patty and Gerald talked about. In response to the journal information, I would also say that it's because we've splintered. It's no accident that 25 years ago the Quarterly Journal of Speech stopped publishing articles in theater. It's partly because there are a whole bunch of other organizations that created journals of theater, and so articles began being published elsewhere. So I think that's part of it. So I don't know that that's as unhopeful as it sounded. I think that there were other outlets created for that. I think another thing that maybe we can do is talk about the elephant in the room, theater as a discipline all over, how we can remain viable and vital, addressing what Roberta was saying. Theater is one of the few departments on a campus that can make money. Don't cut our program, allow us to make money for you. And then, it takes a couple years, but you don't want to sacrifice the opportunity to create education for your students for box office. But if you do a couple of years of butts in the seats, you can educate your audience, and then you can start making money and still not sacrificing your opportunity to do shows that aren't simply box office runners. So I think that would be something that we can play with as well, and we can bring to our audience. Bring to our audience that can also bring people to us. And as we sit here thinking about, 100 years of NCA coming, 25 years ago, AFA left. 10 years ago, we connected back up with AFA to keep our presence viable and to connect with our mission of advocacy. I just want to quote Graham Spainer, who was the president of Penn State University and the keynote speaker at the AFA conference this past year. And he talked about the transformation of teaching. And that is so much what we are here in the NCA Theater Division. And what he said was we can change our future by changing our attitude. Let's focus on what we can do. And I think that's the real key. I think there's a lot we can do. We just need to do it.
Yeah, I'd just like to say something. When Jonas and I had the option to create this panel, and we put ourselves in these chairs, but what we really wanted to do is to facilitate the voices of the people that were senior to us and who came in around the same time we did, or that thing. And I just want to say the one thing I think that brought me to NCA and kept me here was the fact that I was in a department of joint, both communication and theater. And I think that sometimes I would like to really go back and relook at the relationship, the clarity of the relationship between theater and communication and the value we could provide to each other. And I think that it's not just about cross-listing panels. I think that it's got to be more than that. And I guess that's all I want to say.
We can open it up now for...
Can I do a little exercise? Just out of curiosity, because I kind of poked around. How many of you, show of hands, including all of us, how many of you are in one other division, affiliated with one other division at NCA besides theater division? So all but, is that so? And you're only a theater? Are you a theater division?
No, it's theater division.
Just theater division. Yeah. I did a very crude exercise because I downloaded the membership lists from the website for Theater Division and Performance Studies Division, being one of the historical intersections. And of the 194 currently paid active members of the theater division, as of a couple of days ago, all but 73 were cross-listed with performance studies, being our, and I couldn't find another single division where the numbers were that high. And so I wondered the degree, but even though I'm also cross-listed with other divisions, I can't tell you the last time I went to one of the panels. I mean, I don't go. So I wonder what our true what our true membership is. I think it's larger than we think it is, especially when we have young people who are rhetoricians whose subject matter is theater. I think there's more of them out there.
As someone who was very recently drawn to this, I am in graduate school. I'm getting my PhD at NYU, and I also teach at Bronx Community College. And I was drawn to this division very recently, and I'm very excited about this division. One of the things that drew me was things like the acting sharing, because I see it as something that's so useful to me in my own pedagogy. Things that I can then bring right into my teaching, on Monday. I can start thinking about how I can put this in my classes. And things like James's syllabus exchange, or syllabi exchange, but that exchange to me as a theater educator, and what a lot of you have touched upon as being so important, is something that I can just use so practically. I just went to a panel on Advances in the Study of Deception, What the Research Tells Us. And it was such an exciting title to me that the entire room was packed, standing room only. And I thought if we had more panels that were exciting to attend, you would hook the young kind of PhD students who are coming to this and keep them. Because they see what nice people you all are. You all have welcomed me with open arms. People remember my name year to year, and I remember all your names. And I just feel this is such a welcoming community. If you could just get people in the room, they would want to stay for years and years. So that's just my own experience here, and I wanted to share.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm going to go James's route here in a second, because I was one of Ron Shields and White McKepke's little younglings that they sent off to SEA and NCA. Last time I've been to NCA was in Seattle, which I don't know when it was, 10 years ago.
It was 10 years ago.
About 10 years ago. And the reason why I haven't been back is, one, is you guys are competing against MATC, you're competing against ATHA, ASTR, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And two is, I don't know really what the theater division at the NCA, how they're defining themselves that is different from those organizations. I mean, I thought it was really ironic when I was scanning through the program that the theater division, the bastard child, was over in Ponder House. And only like one, two presentations was here. Everything's 8 blocks away from everybody else. To me, the shortcoming is there is no public relations. I don't hear about NCA. I don't hear about the theater division at all. I hear much more about MATC, of course, ATHA, ASTR, than I do hear about NCA theater division. In my department, Winona State University, the department that's on the same floor is communications, and they're a buzz, NCA, NCA. But there's nothing about, and aren't you part of NCA too? And you guys are the theater division. So lack of definition and also publicizing that definition, to me, is crucial for your survival. Because I agree with James, I don't see it going anywhere right now. I don't see, I'm looking around like right now, this is the one panel I attended today, and it's sparsely attended.
I would like to respond to that. I don't disagree with you about that, and I think one of the things I tried to do this morning is to create the position of a webmaster and get some more visibility out there and up there, because I agree with you, there's no place that people can actually find us or look for us or to be there. And I took that on as a personal charge because I agree with you. And the other piece I want to say to you is that I've been at ATHA as long as I've been at NCA, and I have real reasons for why I'm at ATHA and real reasons why I'm at NCA. And they are very different. And if what you're saying is that we're not getting out what we need to be in terms of what we provide, and maybe if it is theater pedagogy that we just heard here, My thought really is that maybe we need to do a little bit of a better job of that. But my feeling is that there's real reasons why people have come here and stayed.
Before it gets lost, I want to reiterate. Oh, I'm sorry. Before it gets lost, I want to reiterate something that Geraldine said, which I think is important, and I wish I'd thought to say it. I think our strength here is that we are a unit of generalists. And that's the reason why we belong to more than one division. And I think that's a strength that we can build on. And the other thing Gerald Lee also mentioned, but I want to make sure it doesn't get lost, is exactly what brought the NYU person here. In a community college, this has one of the strongest community college sections of any professional association that I know. And a lot of the people in the community colleges are teaching theater and speech, still teaching both. And we, of any unit in the NCA that we ought to make a play for, it's the community college section, because I think we have natural affinities with the people in theater there in a way I don't think we have so much with performance studies, which is really theoretically now at some remove from theater studies.
Yes. One of the reasons why I don't go.
Yes, I would say that the discussion we're having here parallels in some interesting ways what we were talking about just yesterday in terms of BFA education and the way we talk about focusing in on actors and stuff, but don't really talk. But then those actors don't talk to technicians; they don't talk to other people. I mean, it seems to me, in some respects, this division only deals with half the art form. Lighting. I have a good friend, Carl Walling, at BGSU. I'm BGSU, and he basically doesn't have the ability to present a paper on lighting design anywhere. If he goes to USITT, they almost don't do any paper sessions. Everything's a poster session. And probably if he sent his paper on lighting design here in Prague Quadrennial that he was at, and he just came back from Seoul where he did some incredible work, probably that would get pushed to a scholar-to-scholar session because it's more visual. But lighting designers are communicating with light. Set designers are communicating. Stage managers, backstage, as we heard, head to chatter. There's all sorts of communication that goes on within our art form. It goes on in rehearsal halls. It goes on in production meetings. One of the big issues is how does a director and a designer who have two different vocabularies talk to each other? Interpersonal communication. I think there's a whole range of people we could pull in that would like to present on stage management, communication, lighting design, set design, pedagogy in set design courses, pedagogy in lighting design courses, strategies to get people more active doing more jobs and things like that backstage. Why don't stage managers ever end up on stage? Why doesn't an actor ever want to stage manage? There's a whole section of people who would love to do that kind of presentations, and aside from USITT, there's no ability for them to put that work out. And I think that if we're talking about how are we different from other divisions, I think that's one of the big ways we're different as an art form. And we're not really, aside from, we get acting exercises and we get wonderful syllabi and things like that, but I think there are a whole bunch of people that would love to present work on their pedagogy and their ideas and ways they communicate through lights and sets and sound and all sorts of things that would really enrich our discussion of theater as an art form and bring in that new membership and that now basically have no place to go. And maybe that's something that NCA as a theater division that we could do that they don't do at Astor. They certainly don't do at Astor. They don't really do it at ATHA, and they barely do it USITT.
As we come to the end of our time together, how quickly it went, I would just like to share one final thought. In the years that I have been here, we have over the years had many wonderful discussions and generated lots of great ideas about how we can be stronger, how we can serve one another better. But to go back to something that Julie had said, there is often a lack of continuity, of follow-through. We generate a lot of great thoughts and then they are lost. So I would like to see that not happen in the case of this panel. We have it recorded for posterity. Okay. But I would also ask that we continue to connect with each other to follow through on the ideas generated today. Keep an eye open for the website we are hoping to develop. Make sure that John has your contact information so that we can stay connected with you. And continue to come back, continue to share thoughts with us as you have them. Consider stepping up in the organization in a leadership capacity. Bring students. Do try to follow through with the ideas that we've presented today. So thank everyone for their time and their attention and their contributions, and I look forward to the work to come. So thank you very much.